सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Late in the winter of 1557, Anthony Jenkinson arrived at the gates of Bukhara at the end of an epic journey across the Caspian Sea, the deserts of Kazan, and the Tartar lands of the Nogai hordes, determined to mine the fabled city's riches for London's Muscovy Company. Instead, the legendary explorer discovered he'd been beaten by Indian merchants. From as far away as Bengal, he recorded, the merchants do bring fine whites which serve for apparel being made of cotton wool and krasko. Krasko being, by the way, rough linen. 2 centuries later, when the Prussian zoologist Peter Simon Pallas visited Astrakhan in Russia, he, I quote, attended with pleasure at the idolatrous worship of the Indian merchants who reside together in the Indian court called the Indarskoy Dvor. The temple, he wrote, included idols of the gods Ram, Lakshmi and Hanuman, as well as 3 black stones brought from the Ganges and regarded by the Indians as sacred. From records excavated by historian Stephen Dale, we have come to know the names of some of the pre-colonial Hindu magnates who traded across the Hindu Kush mountains. There was Banda Kapurchand from Punjab, Barayev Marwar from Rajasthan, Narayan Chanchalmalov, Vishnath Narsalmadasov, Talaram Alimchandov and Ramdas Zusaev. Then 2 new empires, Britain and Russia, transformed the region, and the Indians of Central Asia vanished into the sands. As India struggles for influence in the oil and gas-rich Central Asian region, increasingly dominated by geopolitical rival China, the stories of those great merchant adventurers should guide New Delhi's actions. Expansive ambitions to reshape the course of history underpinned India's decision to become a full-time member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In a speech, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said he would work to create, I quote, a vast network of physical and digital connectivity that extends from Eurasia's northern corner to Asia's southern shores. Fine words, but events conspired against the Prime Minister. The Taliban's rise, sanctions against Iran, and the Ukraine crisis disrupted India's Central Asian dreams. This week, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's summit in Uzbekistan, India's hopes of expanding its presence in Central Asia have run into a geopolitical brick wall. As the Ukraine war grinds on, global isolation is pushing Russian President Vladimir Putin to embrace Chinese President Xi Jinping ever harder. That will give China more ability to expand its presence in Central Asia, where it has already invested over $40 billion, laying the foundations for what scholars Raffaello Pantucci and Alexandros Peterson call an inadvertent empire. Excited talk of building railroads through Iran into Afghanistan and Central Asia, reviving roads headed north to Europe, now seem fanciful. India can't match China's multi-billion-dollar investments. But the history of the Hindu merchants teach us it is not yet out of options. Emperor Zahiruddin Babur, first of the Mughal rulers of India, acquired a kingdom crisscrossed by great trade routes linking Hindustan to Central Asia, Anatolia and northern China. From the plains, he wrote in his memoirs, caravans set out to Kandahar and Kabul and on to the Farghana Valley, I quote, bringing slaves, white cloth, sugar candy, refined and common sugars, and aromatic roots. In addition, textiles, indigo and spices were traded for Turkic horses, the most valuable assets of medieval Indian armies. The trade, modern historians agree, yielded India a significant surplus. Edward Pettus, an East India Company agent in Isfahan, Iran, noted that, I quote, the Banyas, in return for their linens, carry most of the silver and gold out of the country. Little Mughal coinage has been found in Central Asia, suggesting the flow of precious metals was one way. 4 imperial states born of the Mongol nomadic empires, that's Mughal India, Safavid Iran, Uzbek ruled Turan, and the Muscovy kingdom, controlled the vast territories these traders operated across. Enforcement of central authority was, however, very limited. The Jenkinson expedition to Bukhara made its way to the city as part of an armed convoy, repeatedly fighting off bandit raids, and then deemed further passage too dangerous. These dangers, though, didn't deter the Indian merchants who were making their way down that route. The accounts of contemporary chroniclers, Stephen Dale writes, showed that traders from the Punjab city of Multan, perched on the Chenab River, made up the bulk of the expatriate Indian business community in Central Asia. F.A. Kotov, a Russian merchant, saw both Hindu and Muslim merchants from Multan in Isfahan when he visited the city in 1623. Engelbert Kempfer, a German physician, recorded about 10,000 Multan origin merchants lived in the city between 1684-1685. Large enough numbers of Indian men married Turkic women to even create an Indo-Turkic community in Astrakhan's Agrizan suburb. There were some, like a man whose name is recorded as Bujak Lachiram, who lived with his Turkic family in a yurt tent on the steppe. There were others, like another called Zuki, who adopted Orthodox Christianity. Everyone wasn't pleased with the enormous power and influence of the Indian merchants. The historian Scott Levi has recorded one 18th century chronicler, Mir Muhammad Amin Bukhari, bitterly complaining that, I quote, Indian people were masters above the Muslims. In trade relations, they stain upon stain lawlessly put Muslims through one unpleasantry after another. When there were disputes, he said, a protector would defend the Hindu and decide the affair not in accordance with the law, but simply according to the order of the Serai or the inn. Local entrepreneurs bitterly resented the arrival of Indian traders who encroached on their monopoly as well as moneylenders. They repeatedly lobbed rulers in Muscovy to prevent their entry. These efforts, though, were not usually successful. The Tsars, like all rulers, needed revenues after all. Entire families thus ended up moving to Central Asia. A 17th century trader, whose name is recorded as Sutur, wrote to authorities saying that he received such favourable treatment that he encouraged his brothers and 25 other Indian merchants to move to Astrakhan. 2 of his other brothers set up similar businesses in Persia. The trade that powered India's surpluses from Central Asia wasn't, however, for the faint-hearted. Like modern human traffickers, the great merchant convoys from India carried tens of thousands of human beings each year to be sold into slavery. The slave trade was an old one, and India had supplied many of the lives put up for sale in Central Asia. Following the sacking of Thanesar in 1011, the armies of Mahmud of Ghazni captured some 2 lakh slaves. The warlord's 12th century expedition to India yielded so many slaves that their price is reputed to have crashed from 10 dirhams to just 2 dirhams. Iraq and Khorasan were filled with them, the fair and the dark, the rich and the poor, mingled in one common slavery. Iranian courtier Abu Nasr al-Utbi recorded in his 11th century chronicle, the Kitab al-Yamani. Every affluent household, the historian Levi writes, included several slaves to look after its affairs, maintain the garden, and large number of slaves were used to cultivate the land. Trading in slaves was lucrative, but the risks of ending up as one were also not insignificant. In some cases, merchants were captured by bandits as they traversed the Hindu Kush and sold in the slave markets. There were cases where unpaid loans were settled by the creditor seizing and selling the debtor. Little of the stories of the Indian slaves in Central Asia have survived the centuries. However, the work of historian Shadab Bano has recovered some of the kernels. Minhaj Siraj, who travelled from Delhi to Multan in 1269, took slaves as presents for his sister. Hindu Khan, a Mathura native, was purchased by the Persian merchant Fakhruddin Safahani. A 14th century princess of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, owned 10 Indian slave pages. And Thomas Coryat, an English traveller to Multan, even discovered a former slave familiar with Italian. From the 18th century, as the Mughal Empire consolidated its territorial authority, rulers acted to end the export of useful labour. The vacuum in the market was filled with slaves from Iran. Arthur Connolly, the British imperial spy who coined the term the Great Game, reported visiting a slave market at Khulam near Balkh in Afghanistan, where he saw men bid to buy, I quote, a very beautiful Persian girl, so beautiful that I beg to state, I have not seen the like of her. A neck a cubit long, eyes as large as a cup, her tears fell like the rain in spring, and she was altogether so lost in grief that she seemed bereft of her senses. Linen, indigo, sugar, spices, or slaves. Traders from India found ways to transport their cargo across lawless territories, negotiate fraught cultural and legal terrain, and mitigate grave personal risks. They won political influence without armies. The fortunes Indians built in Samarkand, in Bukhara, in Tashkent were built on a single simple thing: selling all that Central Asian consumers needed. To fight China's growing empire in Central Asia, India will need its businesses and entrepreneurs to take their place at the vanguard of the national effort, not just the government. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.